Tell us in the comments where in the world you are watching from and at what time, so I can get to know you better. To support the channel for free, don't forget to subscribe and like the video. They were the warrior monks of the Crusades, the first multinational corporation, the bankers to kings and popes. Shrouded in mystery and myth, their story is a dramatic saga of faith, power, immense wealth, and a brutal, sudden downfall. For 2 centuries, the poor fellow soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon dominated the medieval world, only to be wiped from existence in a matter of years, accused of heresy, blasphemy, and unspeakable crimes. But what is the true story behind the legends? Join us as we uncover the astonishing rise and the catastrophic fall of the Knights Templar. The year is 1100. Jerusalem has been captured, its streets washed clean of the blood from the brutal siege that concluded the First Crusade. A new, fragile reality has taken root in the Holy Land. 4 Crusader states, known collectively as Outremer, or the land beyond the sea, now cling to the Levantine coast, the Kingdom of Jerusalem, the Principality of Antioch, the County of Edessa, and the County of Tripoli. For the knights and nobles who remained, this was a dream realized. A Christian kingdom re-established in the land of Christ's birth. Yet this dream was built on a foundation of sand, surrounded by a sea of hostile forces. The initial fervor of the crusade had waned, with the majority of the crusading army having fulfilled their vows and returned to Europe, laden with relics and stories. Those who stayed were a skeleton force, tasked with governing and defending vast territories with a sparse Christian population. The most pressing danger, however, was not a full-scale military invasion, but the insidious threat that lurked on the roads. For the thousands of devout pilgrims who now flocked to the Holy Land, the journey was far from over once their ships docked at the port of Jaffa. The final leg of their spiritual quest, the 70-kilometer trek inland to the holy city of Jerusalem, was a gauntlet of death. The roads snaked through rocky hills and desolate passes, perfect ambush territory for Bedouin raiders, Saracen patrols, and common bandits who preyed on the vulnerable. These pilgrim groups, often traveling on foot with their life savings, were easy targets. They were robbed, enslaved, or murdered with horrifying regularity. The nascent kingdom of Jerusalem, under its first king, Baldwin I, simply lacked the manpower to effectively police these vital arteries. His knights were stretched thin, garrisoning castles and defending borders. The promise of safe passage to the holiest sites in Christendom was turning into a deadly gamble, threatening the very legitimacy and economic viability of the new kingdom. A profound and dangerous vacuum of power existed, one that conventional military forces could not fill. A new kind of solution was desperately needed, one that could blend the piety of a monk with the martial prowess of a knight to protect the faithful on their perilous path. In this atmosphere of constant peril, a French knight from the Champagne region named Hugues de Payens stepped forward. Sometime around the year 1119, he and 8 other knights, including his kinsman Godfrey de Saint-Omer, presented themselves to King Baldwin II of Jerusalem. Their proposal was as radical as it was simple. They sought to form a new kind of religious community, a monastic order of knights dedicated to a single earthly purpose: the protection of pilgrims on the road to Jerusalem. They would take the traditional monastic vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, but they would not retreat to a cloister for a life of prayer. Instead, their monastery, would be the bandit-infested roads, and their prayers would be answered with the edge of a sword. King Baldwin II, acutely aware of his inability to secure the roads and impressed by their piety and determination, welcomed the idea. He and the Patriarch of Jerusalem granted the Knights a headquarters in a wing of the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which stood on the Temple Mount. The Crusaders believed this site to be the location of the original Temple of Solomon, a place of immense historical and religious significance. From this association, the fledgling order derived its name, the Poor Fellow Soldiers of Christ and the Temple of Solomon, soon to be known simply as the Knights Templar. For the first 9 years of their existence, they were a humble and obscure group. Legend holds that the original 9 knights were so poor they had to share horses, with 2 knights riding a single mount, an image that would later be immortalized on their official seal. They wore discarded clothing and relied on donations for sustenance. They accepted no new members during this initial period, and their small band patrolled the roads, offering what protection they could. They were a curiosity, a band of warrior monks in a land full of soldiers of fortune and pious pilgrims, yet belonging fully to neither group. Many were skeptical of this strange hybrid of monasticism and militarism. It was a concept that challenged the established norms of both the church and the warrior aristocracy. For this radical idea to survive, let alone flourish, it would need more than just royal patronage in a distant kingdom. It would need the full and unequivocal blessing of the most powerful institution in Europe, the Roman Catholic Church. The turning point for the small, impoverished order came in 1127, when King Baldwin II sent Hugues de Payens back to Europe on a crucial mission. He was tasked with gaining official papal sanction for the Templars, and just as importantly, recruiting new members and raising funds for the defense of the Holy Land. This was a diplomatic tour that would decide the order's fate. De Payens was not alone in his quest. He carried with him letters of support from the King of Jerusalem, and crucially, he had a powerful ally in his corner, Bernard of Clairvaux. Bernard was the most influential churchman of his era, a Cistercian abbot, theologian, and charismatic leader whose words could sway popes and kings. He was also the nephew of André de Montbard, one of the 9 founding Templars. Bernard saw in the Templars the potential for a perfect fusion of his monastic ideals and the practical needs of the church militant. He became the order's greatest champion, using his immense prestige to promote their cause. The culmination of these efforts was the Council of Troyes, convened in January 1129 in Hugues de Payens' home region of Champagne. Under the guidance of Bernard of Clairvaux, the council officially recognized the Knights Templar as a religious and military order. More than just recognition, the council tasked Bernard with drafting a formal code of conduct for the knights. The result was the Latin Rule, a document of 72 clauses that laid the foundation for the Templar way of life. It was a meticulous and austere code, drawing heavily on Cistercian monastic principles. It dictated everything from their prayers and diet — eating meat was limited to 3 days a week — to their equipment and hairstyle. Knights were to wear a simple white mantle, symbolizing purity, and were forbidden from having personal wealth. All spoils of war belonged to the order. The rule established a strict hierarchy, demanded absolute obedience to the Grandmaster, and forbade any form of vanity, such as pointed shoes or elaborate decorations on their bridles. It was a blueprint for creating a disciplined, dedicated, and spiritually focused fighting force. The papal sanction and the Latin rule granted at Troyes were a seismic event. The Templars were no longer a small, eccentric band of knights in a faraway land. They were now an official, sanctioned arm of the Holy Mother Church, directly answerable only to the Pope himself. This new status unleashed a torrent of support. Donations of land, money, and castles poured in from nobles across Europe, and a wave of new recruits from the highest echelons of the aristocracy flocked to join their ranks, with the order officially sanctioned at the Council of Troyes. Its most powerful advocate, Bernard of Clairvaux, took up his pen to create what would become its most effective piece of propaganda. Around the year 1130, he wrote a treatise titled De Laude Novae Militia, in praise of the new knighthood. This was far more than a simple endorsement. It was a profound theological and philosophical justification for the existence of a military monastic order, a concept that still seemed contradictory to many. In the text, addressed directly to Hugh de Payan, Bernard masterfully contrasts the Templars, the new knighthood, with the secular knights of the day. He paints a scathing picture of traditional knights as vain, greedy, and violent men fighting for worldly glory, wealth, and personal pride. Their fine clothes, long hair, and ornate armor were, in his view, symbols of a corrupt and sinful lifestyle. They killed their fellow men for trivial reasons and lived in constant fear of both dying and killing unjustly. In stark opposition, he presents the Templar knight as the ideal Christian warrior. The Templar, Bernard argues, is an instrument of God. He fights not for himself but for Christ. He is doubly armed, protected by the armor of faith on the inside and the armor of steel on the outside. Bernard then tackles the central moral dilemma, the act of killing. He introduces a revolutionary concept he calls malicide, not homicide, but the killing of evil itself. When a Templar kills a pagan aggressor, he is not sinning. Instead, Bernard writes, he is a Christ's executioner for the punishment of evildoers and a Christ's defender for the protection of Christians. The death of an enemy is a victory for Christ, and the death of the Templar in battle is a glorious martyrdom, guaranteeing his immediate entry into heaven. This powerful rhetoric transformed the perception of the Templars. They were no longer just guards for pilgrims, they were agents of divine justice, the embodiment of a sanctified violence. De Laude Novae Militia was widely circulated and became a sensation across Europe. It provided a compelling spiritual framework that made joining the Templars an act of supreme piety. It assuaged the consciences of nobles who wished to use their martial skills in service to God, offering them a path to salvation through the sword. This was the ideological fuel that would power the Templar Order's meteoric rise from obscurity to one of the most powerful institutions in the medieval world. To understand the Knights Templar is to understand their potent symbolism, an identity forged in the crucible of faith and war, embodied by their iconic attire. The pure white mantle emblazoned with a stark, blood-red cross. This was not merely a uniform, it was a public declaration of their dual nature. They were both monks and soldiers, men who had taken vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, yet whose purpose was to wield the sword in defense of Christendom. The white mantle, granted by Pope Eugenius III in 1147, symbolized the purity of their monastic life, a commitment to leave behind the darkness of sin for a life of virtue. The red cross, worn over the heart, represented their willingness to shed their blood for the faith, a constant reminder of the martyrdom of Christ and the fate that could await them on the battlefields of the Holy Land. This visual identity set them apart, making them instantly recognizable as the elite shock troops of the Crusades. Their internal structure was a rigid hierarchy designed for maximum efficiency. At its apex was the Grandmaster, the absolute authority of the order, elected for life. Below him were the Seneschal, his deputy, and the Marshal, who commanded the knights in battle. The order was comprised of distinct classes: the aristocratic knights, who were the main fighting force; the sergeants, drawn from non-noble backgrounds, who served as light cavalry, administrators, and craftsmen; and the chaplains, ordained priests responsible for the spiritual well-being of their brethren. Life within a Templar preceptory was austere and heavily regulated by the Latin rule, a code of conduct adapted from the Cistercian order. Their days were a disciplined cycle of prayer, military training, and manual labor, with little room for personal comfort or possessions. This rigorous discipline and unwavering devotion created a brotherhood of warriors unlike any the world had ever seen, bound by oath and purpose, and defined by the stark contrast of their white mantle and red cross. While their military prowess defined their public image, the true genius of the Knights Templar lay in their unprecedented economic innovation. They evolved from a humble order dependent on charity into what can be considered the world's first multinational corporation with a financial network that spanned the known world. Initially, their wealth grew from donations of land, cash, and property from pious nobles and monarchs seeking to support the defense of the Holy Land. However, the Templars quickly proved to be astute administrators. Across Europe, they established thousands of commanderies, which were not just military outposts, but also thriving agricultural and commercial centers. These estates, encompassing farms, vineyards, mills, and markets, generated immense revenue for the order. Crucially, through a series of papal bulls, the Templars were granted exemption from all local taxes and tithes, allowing their wealth to accumulate unchecked. Their most revolutionary innovation was the creation of a sophisticated banking system. A pilgrim embarking for Jerusalem could deposit their funds at a Templar preceptory in London or Paris and receive a letter of credit. Upon arriving in the Holy Land, they could present this letter at a Templar house in Acre or Jerusalem and withdraw the equivalent amount, minus a fee. This system eliminated the immense danger of carrying vast sums of gold and silver across bandit-infested lands and pirate-plagued seas. The Templars effectively became the bankers for all of Christendom, lending vast sums to popes, kings, and merchants. Their fortified temple in Paris became the treasury of France, and their temple in London served a similar function for the English crown. This enormous wealth funded their military operations, the construction of their formidable castles, and their vast logistical network. But it also sowed the seeds of their downfall, breeding jealousy and suspicion among the very monarchs who depended on their financial power. The success of the Knights Templar in both war and finance was built upon a foundation of logistical mastery that was centuries ahead of its time. Their ability to move men, money, and materials across vast and hostile territories was the engine that powered their entire enterprise. At the heart of this network was the Templar fleet. Owning their own ships, they controlled a private navy that dominated the Mediterranean. These vessels were not only used for military transport, ferrying knights and supplies to the Crusader states, but they also ran a profitable commercial enterprise, carrying pilgrims, merchants, and valuable cargo between the ports of Europe and the Levant. This maritime supremacy gave them unparalleled speed and security in an era of perilous travel. On land, their network of commanderies, spaced roughly a day's ride apart, formed a sophisticated supply chain. These fortified posts served as recruitment centers, training grounds, administrative hubs, and secure depots. A knight traveling from Portugal to Palestine could rely on this chain for fresh horses, food, lodging, and protection, ensuring he arrived ready for battle. The Templars also invested heavily in infrastructure, building and maintaining roads and bridges, and actively policing them to protect travelers from brigands. This made pilgrimage routes safer and fostered trade, further enhancing their own influence and income. Their agricultural practices were equally innovative. On their vast European estates, they employed advanced farming techniques, crop rotation, and land management to maximize yields, ensuring a steady flow of revenue and resources to fund their overseas operations. This intricate, self-sustaining system of transport, communication, and resource management allowed the order to operate with an efficiency that no medieval kingdom could match. They were not just warriors. They were expert quartermasters, engineers, and supply chain managers, a fact that was essential to their 2 centuries of dominance. In the volatile landscape of the Crusader states, known as Outremer, survival depended on stone and strategy. Here, the Knights Templar cemented their reputation not only as elite warriors, but also as master builders, constructing some of the most formidable castles of the medieval era. These fortresses were the backbone of the Latin East's defense, strategic anchors in a sea of hostility. They served as military garrisons, administrative centers, and secure refuges for Christian populations. The Templars either took control of existing castles like Tortosa and Safed and massively refortified them, or they built new ones from the ground up. Their designs incorporated cutting-edge military architecture, often pioneering concepts that would later appear in Europe. They championed the use of concentric fortifications, a castle within a castle design with multiple lines of walls, creating deadly killing grounds for any attacker who breached the outer defenses. Their towers were immense, often square or rounded to deflect siege projectiles, and equipped with machicolations, openings through which defenders could drop rocks, boiling oil, or arrows on enemies below. One of their greatest achievements was the magnificent Château Pèlerin, or Atli Castle, built on a peninsula on the coast of modern-day Israel. Constructed between 1217 and 1221, it was a masterpiece of design, with 2 massive walls and a formidable inner keep, protected on 2 sides by the sea. It was so well defended that it was never taken by siege, only being abandoned after the fall of Acre in 1291. Building and garrisoning these colossal structures required an astronomical investment of wealth and manpower, a testament to the order's logistical and financial power. These castles were not just defensive structures. They were projections of power, symbols of the Templars' unwavering commitment to defending the Holy Land, etched in stone against the desert sky. The year is 1177, The Kingdom of Jerusalem, a fragile Christian outpost in a hostile land, teeters on the brink of annihilation. Its king, Baldwin IV, is a mere 16 years old, his body ravaged by leprosy, a condition that would have seen most men sequestered from the world. Yet within this frail frame burned an indomitable spirit. Saladin, the brilliant and ambitious Sultan of Egypt and Syria, saw an opportunity. Believing the kingdom to be weak and its leadership incapacitated, he marched a formidable army of over 26,000 seasoned soldiers into its heartland, bypassing Crusader fortresses with contemptuous ease, his sights set on the ultimate prize, Jerusalem itself. The city was stripped of its defenders, who had marched north to counter a different threat, leaving only a skeleton force to face the Sultan. The situation was beyond desperate. It was hopeless. Baldwin, carried on a litter, refused to concede. Rallying what forces he could muster, fewer than 500 knights, including a crucial contingent of 80 Templars and a few thousand infantry, he raced to intercept Saladin's vast host. He was joined by the formidable and controversial Reynald de Chatillon, a warrior whose ferocity was matched only by his ambition. They caught Saladin's army completely by surprise near the hill of Montgisard. The Sultan's forces were scattered, overconfident, and unprepared for a pitched battle, many having been allowed to forage across the countryside. Seizing the moment of chaos, Baldwin ordered a charge. He had the relic of the true cross raised before him, and dismounting from his litter, he knelt in the sand, praying for a victory against impossible odds. Then, with the strength of a man possessed, he led his knights forward. The charge of the Crusader heavy cavalry was a thunderous, terrifying spectacle. They smashed into the core of Saladin's army, carving a path of destruction through the unprepared ranks. The Templars, fighting with the fanatical zeal for which they were legendary, were a whirlwind of steel and fury. Saladin's personal Mamluk bodyguard was shattered. The Sultan's army, so confident just moments before, dissolved into a panicked rout. Saladin himself barely escaped, forced to flee back to Egypt on a racing camel, his grand invasion a catastrophic failure. The Battle of Montgisard was more than a victory. It was hailed as a miracle, a sign of divine favor that would secure the kingdom for another decade. A decade after the miracle at Montgisard, the political landscape of the Kingdom of Jerusalem had fractured. The unifying presence of Baldwin IV was gone, and in his place ruled Guy de Lusignan, a king whose character was unequal to the challenges he faced. The fragile truce with Saladin was shattered by the reckless actions of Reynald de Chatillon, who, in an act of profound arrogance, attacked a wealthy Muslim caravan, breaking his oath and provoking the full, calculated wrath of the Sultan. In the scorching summer of 1187, Saladin laid a trap. He besieged the city of Tiberias, a move designed not to take the city, but to lure the Crusader army out from its well-supplied and watered position at Sepphoris. Despite the sound advice of experienced commanders like Raymond of Tripoli to remain fortified, King Guy was swayed by the heated counsel of Reynald and the Grandmaster of the Templars, Gerard de Riedfort. They branded caution as cowardice, and Guy, weak-willed and insecure, gave the fateful order to march. The march became a grueling ordeal, a slow, agonizing procession into oblivion. Under the relentless July sun, the heavily armored knights and infantry trudged across a parched, waterless plain. Saladin's light cavalry swarmed around them, a constant torment of arrows and skirmishes. setting fire to the dry brush to choke the Crusaders with smoke and heat. Thirst became their greatest enemy, a gnawing madness that sapped their strength and will. By the time they reached the twin peaks known as the Horns of Hattin, the Crusader army was a shadow of itself, exhausted, dehydrated, and demoralized. They were completely surrounded. The next morning, July 4th, 1187, the battle began. It was not a battle, but a slaughter. The Crusader infantry, desperate for water, broke ranks and were cut down. The knights, fighting with the courage of despair, made several valiant but futile charges. By the end of the day, the field was a testament to a cataclysmic defeat. The army of the Kingdom of Jerusalem was annihilated. King Guy was captured, the relic of the True Cross was seized, and hundreds of Templar and Hospitaller knights were executed. The kingdom was left utterly defenseless, its fate sealed in the dust and heat of Hattin. The disaster at Hattin was absolute. With the Crusader army destroyed, the Kingdom of Jerusalem lay open and vulnerable. Saladin did not hesitate. In a lightning campaign that followed the battle, his forces swept across the land, and one by one, the Christian cities and castles fell. Acre, Nablus, Jaffa, Sidon, Beirut. Most surrendered without a fight, their garrisons having perished on the plains of Hattin. Within 2 months, only a handful of strongholds remained, the most important of which was the spiritual heart of the kingdom, Jerusalem itself. The holy city was unprepared for a siege, overflowing with terrified refugees and defended by a mere handful of knights. Its salvation, or at least its dignity in defeat, would fall to one man, Balian of Ibelin, a high-ranking noble who had managed to escape the carnage at Hattin. Balian negotiated his passage to Jerusalem from Saladin for the sole purpose of retrieving his wife and family. Upon his arrival, however, the desperate populace and clergy begged him to take command of the defense. Bound by his oath to Saladin not to take up arms against him, Balian was torn, but seeing the city's plight, he accepted the burden of leadership. He organized a citizen militia, knighting dozens of squires and burgesses to create a semblance of a command structure. When Saladin's army arrived in September 1187, the defense was spirited but ultimately hopeless. The Sultan's siege engines relentlessly pounded the walls, and after several days, a breach was made. With his soldiers pouring into the city, Balian went to parley with Saladin, offering a stark choice. If merciful terms of surrender were not granted, he would not only fight to the last man, but would systematically destroy the city, including the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque, sites holy to Islam. Faced with this threat, and being a man of chivalry and faith, Saladin relented. He agreed to a peaceful surrender, in stark contrast to the horrific massacre that had accompanied the First Crusade's capture of the city in 1099. Saladin's conquest was orderly. He allowed the inhabitants to ransom their freedom for a modest fee, and he and his commanders personally paid for the release of thousands who could not afford it. On October 2nd, 1187, after 88 years of Christian rule, the banners of Saladin flew over the walls of Jerusalem. With the fall of Jerusalem, the dream of the Crusader kingdom seemed to be over. The Christian presence in the Levant had been reduced to a single, defiant port, Tyre. It was here that the survivors of Hattin and the refugees from fallen cities gathered, organizing a desperate defense under Conrad of Montferrat that miraculously held Saladin at bay. The loss of the Holy City, however, sent shockwaves through Europe, igniting the passions that would fuel the Third Crusade and bring the great kings of Christendom, including Richard the Lionheart of England, to the shores of the Holy Land. The focus of this new, massive military effort would not be Jerusalem itself, but another coastal city that had fallen to Saladin, Acre. Strategically located with a superb natural harbor, Acre was the gateway to the Galilee and the most vital commercial center in the kingdom. Its recapture was deemed essential for any future campaign to retake Jerusalem and for the very survival of a Christian state in the region. In August of 1189, what remained of the local Crusader forces, now led by the newly released King Guy de Lusignan, marched from Tyre and began a siege of Acre's Muslim garrison. This act of audacity initiated one of the most grueling and complex sieges of the medieval era. The Christian army besieged the city from the land, while Saladin, in turn, marched his main army to relieve the city, encircling the Christian besiegers. It became a bizarre and brutal stalemate, a siege within a siege that would last for nearly 2 years. The arrival of the armies of the Third Crusade in 1191, with their advanced siege technology and fresh manpower, finally tipped the balance. After a relentless assault, the exhausted Muslim garrison of Acre surrendered to Richard the Lionheart and Philip II of France. The victory was pivotal. Though Jerusalem would remain in Muslim hands, the capture of Acre provided the battered kingdom with a new capital. For the next century, the city would be the political, military, and economic heart of the Crusader state, a bustling cosmopolitan port that ensured their survival. It was the last great bastion, a symbol of resilience and the new reality of a kingdom whose existence now depended entirely on its control of the sea. By the dawn of the 14th century, the poor fellow soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon were anything but poor. The Knights Templar had evolved from a humble band of warrior monks protecting pilgrims into the most powerful and wealthy multinational corporation of the medieval world. Their network of preceptories, farms, and fortresses stretched from the British Isles to the Eastern Mediterranean, operating with an efficiency that modern logistics experts would envy. They were not merely a military order. They were the bankers to Christendom. They pioneered a system of credit notes, allowing pilgrims and nobles to deposit funds in one city, like London or Paris, and withdraw them in Jerusalem, eliminating the immense danger of carrying vast sums of gold across bandit-infested lands. This innovation made them indispensable to the economic life of Europe. Their Grand Temple in Paris was not just a monastery. It was the de facto central bank of France, a fortified repository holding the royal treasury itself. But their power was not just economic. The order answered to one authority alone, the Pope in Rome. They were exempt from local laws, taxes, and the jurisdiction of bishops and kings. Their knights were among the most disciplined and feared warriors of the age, their fortresses impregnable. In France, they owned immense tracts of land, entire villages, mills, and markets, all contributing to a river of wealth that flowed into their coffers. This autonomy created a paradox. While they served the kings of Europe, they were not truly subject to them. They were a sovereign entity operating within other sovereign kingdoms, a state within states. This unique position bred respect and reliance, but it also fostered deep undercurrents of jealousy and suspicion. To a monarch seeking to centralize power and assert absolute authority over his domain, The Templars represented an intolerable anomaly, a wealthy, armed, and independent organization on his own soil, beyond his command and control. Their success had made them formidable, but it had also made them a target. On the throne of France sat a man of striking contradictions. King Philip IV, known as Le Bel or the Fair for his handsome, impassive features, was a monarch of intense piety and chilling ruthlessness. He possessed an almost mystical belief in the divine right of his kingship and was driven by a singular ambition: to forge France into a centralized, modern state under the absolute authority of the crown. But this grand vision came at a staggering cost. Philip's reign was plagued by incessant and expensive wars, most notably against Edward I of England and the rebellious Flemish cities. These conflicts drained the royal treasury to the point of bankruptcy. Desperate for funds, Philip resorted to ever more extreme measures. He repeatedly debased the kingdom's currency, reducing the silver content of coins to generate short-term profit. A move that crippled the economy, sparked riots among the populace, and earned him the moniker, the counterfeiter king. He levied crushing taxes on the clergy, leading to a bitter and protracted conflict with Pope Boniface VIII. In 1306, in a move that presaged his future actions, he abruptly arrested all the Jews in France, confiscated their property and assets, and expelled them from the kingdom. He did the same to the Lombard bankers, another wealthy group of foreigners whose financial success he coveted. Yet, these seizures provided only temporary relief. The crown's debts continued to mount, and Philip's gaze inevitably fell upon the one organization in his realm whose wealth seemed limitless and whose assets were ripe for the taking: the Knights Templar. He saw their Paris temple, a fortress of finance that even held his own government's funds, not as a convenience, but as an affront. In Philip's cold calculus, the Templars were no longer a holy order to be revered, but a vast repository of wealth that could solve his financial crisis, and a powerful institution whose independence challenged his own absolute authority. His piety provided the perfect cover for his avarice. If he could prove the order was corrupt, its destruction would be not an act of theft, but a righteous duty, an ambition as audacious as the destruction of the Knights Templar could not be born in the mind of the king alone. It required architects, men of sharp intellect, unwavering loyalty, and a complete absence of scruples. Philip found such men in his chief ministers, Guillaume de Nogaret and Enguerrand de Marigny. Nogaret, the keeper of the royal seal, was a brilliant and ruthless lawyer, a man whose family had suffered during the Albigensian Crusade, leaving him with a deep-seated animosity towards the power of the church. He was the strategist, the man who understood that a simple seizure of assets was not enough. To dismantle an order protected by the Pope himself, they needed a charge so heinous it would discredit them entirely in the eyes of God and man: heresy. The conspiracy began to take shape in the shadows of the royal court. Agents were dispatched to collect evidence. They sought out disgruntled or expelled members of the order, men with grievances who could be persuaded to talk. A key figure emerged in Escure de Floiran, a disgraced Templar from the south of France. In exchange for his freedom from prison, he spun lurid tales of the order's secret initiation rites. He spoke of new recruits being forced to deny Christ, to spit upon the crucifix, to engage in obscene kisses, and to worship a mysterious bearded head, an idol known as Baphomet. Whether these claims contained a shred of truth or were entirely fabricated to please his royal interrogators, remains a subject of intense debate. But for Nogaret and Philip, their veracity was irrelevant. They were the perfect weapons. These accusations were carefully compiled into a secret dossier. The charges were sensational, shocking, and, most importantly, they fell under the purview of the Inquisition, allowing Philip to sidestep papal authority, at least initially. The plan was not just to arrest the knights, it was to launch a coordinated propaganda campaign to ensure their public condemnation before any trial could even begin. A web of deceit was being woven, its threads spun from rumor, coercion, and the king's insatiable greed. The date would echo through history, forever cementing itself in Western superstition as a symbol of misfortune. In the autumn of 1307, King Philip's secret plan was ready to be unleashed. For weeks, sealed orders had been dispatched by royal messenger to seneschals, bailiffs, and loyal agents in every town and district across the Kingdom of France. The instructions inside were precise and chilling, bearing a wax seal that commanded them not to be opened upon penalty of death until the appointed day. The secrecy was absolute. The Templars, for all their military intelligence and political connections, had no inkling of the storm about to break over them. Their Grandmaster, Jacques de Molay, was in Paris, having recently returned from the East. He had been consulting with both the Pope and the King about a potential new crusade and the possibility of merging the Templars with their rival order, the Hospitallers. He felt secure, operating at the highest echelons of power. As dawn broke on Friday, October 13th, a day chosen for its logistical and symbolic power, a silent, coordinated strike was launched. Throughout France, royal officials broke the seals on their orders. They read the king's proclamation, filled with shocking accusations of heresy, blasphemy, and sodomy against the warrior monks who had been revered for nearly 2 centuries. At once, soldiers moved on every Templar preceptory, farm, and castle within their jurisdiction. In Paris, Guillaume de Nogaret himself led the operation. Jacques de Molay and the Knights of the Paris Temple were roused from their sleep and arrested without a fight. They were caught so completely by surprise that there was virtually no resistance anywhere in the kingdom. In a single morning, an elite, battle-hardened military order was decapitated, and its members, from the highest commander to the lowliest serving brother, were thrown into royal dungeons. The efficiency and scale of the operation were breathtaking. Philip had succeeded in capturing the men, but his true prize was their legendary treasure and vast properties, which were immediately seized by the crown. The shockwave reverberated across Christendom. The Templars were in chains, and their trial by ordeal had just begun. The dawn of Friday, October 13, 1307, broke with an unprecedented chill. Across France, agents of King Philip the Fair moved with chilling efficiency. In a single, coordinated strike, thousands of Knights Templar were arrested, their properties seized, and their sacred order plunged into darkness. The warrior monks, once the celebrated heroes of Christendom, were now branded as heretics, their white mantles stained with accusations of the vilest crimes. The transition from veneration to vilification was dizzyingly swift, and it was only the beginning of their ordeal. Dragged from their preceptories and thrown into royal dungeons, the knights were subjected to the full, brutal force of the medieval Inquisition, an instrument now wielded not by the Pope, but by the French king. The objective was not truth, but confession. The methods were scientifically cruel, designed to shatter the body, and with it, the will. Knights were subjected to the strappado, their arms tied behind their backs and hoisted into the air, dislocating their shoulders with agonizing slowness. Others had their feet greased with fat and held over open flames until the flesh was charred and the bones exposed. Sleep deprivation, starvation, and psychological torment, in complete isolation, wore down even the most resolute warriors. The inquisitors presented them with a list of charges, each more shocking than the last: denying Christ and spitting on the cross during secret initiation rites, worshipping a demonic head known as Baphomet, and engaging in institutionalized sodomy. Under the relentless agony of torture, resistance crumbled. Men who had faced Saracen armies without flinching now broke, admitting to anything their tormentors demanded. In Paris alone, 36 knights died during their interrogation. Even the Grandmaster, Jacques de Molay, confessed under pressure. These forced confessions, extracted through unimaginable pain and suffering, became the foundation upon which Philip would build his case to destroy the most powerful military order in the world. News of King Philip's mass arrest of the Templars sent shockwaves to the papal court in Avignon. Pope Clement V, though a Frenchman and politically indebted to Philip, was furious. The Templars were a papal order responsible only to him. Philip's unilateral action was a direct challenge to the authority of the Holy See. A tense power struggle ensued. Clement, caught between his duty as the Vicar of Christ and the immense pressure from the powerful French monarch, attempted to wrest control of the proceedings. He suspended the inquisitorial trials and demanded the knights be handed over to church custody. In the summer of 1308, he sent his own trusted cardinals to interrogate the highest-ranking leaders of the order, including Grandmaster Jacques de Molay, who were being held at the king's castle in Chinon. What transpired there remained hidden for 7 centuries, a secret locked away in the Vatican archives. Its rediscovery in 2001, in a document now known as the Chinon Parchment, fundamentally changes our understanding of the Pope's role. Before the papal legates, away from Philip's torturers, the Templar leaders told their story. They admitted that the initiation ceremony did involve a symbolic denial of Christ, but they insisted it was a misguided test of obedience, a ritual to simulate the kind of pressure and interrogation a knight might face if captured by Saracens. They vehemently denied heresy, idolatry, and all other charges, and they begged the Pope for forgiveness for their secret and unorthodox rites. The parchment reveals the Pope's decision. After hearing their testimony, Clement V granted full absolution to Jacques de Molay and the other leaders. He formally lifted their excommunication and reintegrated them into the communion of the Church. In the Pope's eyes, the leaders were not heretics. But this created an impossible dilemma. Clement had privately absolved them, but Philip's public propaganda campaign, fueled by hundreds of torture-induced confessions, had already condemned the order in the court of public opinion. The Pope was trapped, his private verdict powerless against the king's public narrative. 7 long years of imprisonment, interrogation, and uncertainty had passed. The date was March 18th, 1314. On a small island in the Seine, the Île aux Juifs, with the towering spires of Notre Dame Cathedral as a backdrop, a scaffold had been erected. A crowd gathered, eager to witness the final chapter in the downfall of the Knights Templar. The order's leaders, including the frail, white-bearded Grandmaster Jacques de Molay and his trusted preceptor of Normandy, Geoffrey de Charnay, were brought forth. They were expected to publicly reaffirm their confessions one last time before being sentenced to a life of perpetual imprisonment. It was meant to be the final nail in the Templar coffin, a spectacle of submission for all of Paris to see. But the spectacle that unfolded was not the one King Philip had planned. As the papal commission prepared to read the sentence, Jacques de Molay, a man in his late 60s, broken by years of captivity, found a final reserve of strength. He raised his voice, not in submission, but in thunderous defiance. He declared to the stunned crowd that his confession and those of his brethren had been lies, forced from them through the unbearable pain of torture. He proclaimed the Knights Templar to be a holy and blameless order, and that he was no traitor to his faith. "I confess my guilt," he cried, "which consists in having, to my shame and sorrow, betrayed the truth to save my miserable life." Geoffrey de Charnay quickly joined him, echoing his master's recantation. The crowd erupted. The cardinals were thrown into confusion. King Philip, observing from nearby, was incandescent with rage. This public recantation was an act of ultimate defiance, a complete reversal that threatened to unravel his entire 7-year campaign. He would not allow it. Bypassing all legal authority, the king made a swift and brutal decision. That very evening, without further trial, Jacques de Molay and Geoffrey de Charnay were taken to the end of the island and bound to stakes. As the pyre was lit, de Molay reportedly faced the flames without fear, praying aloud until the end, a martyr in the heart of Paris. As the flames climbed higher around him, legend holds that Jacques de Molay uttered one final, chilling prophecy. With his last breath, he is said to have summoned his persecutors to join him before the judgment of God. He gave Pope Clement a deadline of 40 days and King Philip a year. Whether or not the words were truly spoken, what followed cemented the curse in the annals of history. Just over a month later, on April 20th, Pope Clement V died in agony from a sudden, ravaging disease. Before the year was out, King Philip the Fair, the powerful Iron King, was thrown from his horse during a hunt and died from the resulting infection. The two men who had orchestrated the destruction of the Templars were dead. The curse, it seemed, had been fulfilled. Officially, the order's legacy was one of disgrace. At the Council of Vienne in 1312, Pope Clement, under extreme pressure from Philip, had formally dissolved the Knights Templar. He did so not on the basis of a guilty verdict, which was never officially reached, but on the grounds that the order's reputation had been so irrevocably tarnished that it could no longer function. Its immense wealth was to be transferred to the rival Knights Hospitaller, though in reality, Philip and other monarchs seized the lion's share. But the dramatic, unjust, and fiery end of the Templars ensured their immortality. Their brutal suppression gave birth to a legend that far outshone their historical reality. They transformed from soldiers of the Church into martyrs, guardians of a lost truth, and keepers of profound secrets. For centuries, their story has fueled speculation. Did they hide a fabulous treasure before their arrest? Did they possess holy relics like the Shroud of Turin or the Holy Grail itself? Their symbolism, rituals, and alleged secret knowledge would later be claimed by organizations like the Freemasons, weaving the Templar mythos into the very fabric of esoteric lore. In the end, Philip's victory was hollow. He destroyed the men and the organization. But in doing so, he created a legend that would outlive his own dynasty and fascinate the world for centuries to come.